Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, Elon Musk has been giving away $1 million each day to random voters in battleground states. That's if they sign his petition in support of the First and Second Amendments. But the offer is facing pushback, with some legal experts saying it could be illegal. Vice President Kamala Harris teams up with Liz Cheney again for an ambitious three-state tour. Jason Blair brings us their message to undecided voters. Former President Trump makes multiple stops in North Carolina. He's promising to support the state's recovery from Hurricane Helene. David Lamb is in Asheville. Israeli forces unleash a series of airstrikes on Hezbollah's financial institutions in Lebanon. At the same time, documents reportedly showing the details of Israel's plans to attack Iran have been leaked. Jason Perry reports. And the U.S. is set to send $400 million worth of weapons to Ukraine. That's amid reports that North Korean soldiers might soon fight for Russia. Ariane Posdar has the latest.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Elon Musk is giving random registered voters $1 million checks if they sign his petition supporting the U.S. Constitution. Is this legal? Here's the story.
Tonight's person is John Prayer.
Billionaire tech magnate Elon Musk is giving voters $1 million checks every day until Election Day.
All right. Thank you.
All they have to do is sign his petition supporting free speech and the right to bear arms. Saturday's winner, John.
Thanks, Elon. This is great.
Sunday's winner, Christine.
It was so exciting. Like, I don't win things. And to win $1 million is crazy.
The petition asks registered voters to pledge their support for the First and Second Amendments. It's open only to registered voters in Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, and North Carolina. In other words, the battleground states. Pennsylvania registered voters will get $100 for signing the petition.
Pennsylvania is it's the linchpin in this election.
Elon Musk explained Saturday his goal is to promote the Constitution, which he says will protect America against tyranny.
How do we get people to know about this petition? Because the legacy media won't report on it. You know, not everyone's on X. So I figure, how do we get people to know about it? Well, this news, I think, is going to really fly.
Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro questions the legality of Musk's petition.
It's something that law enforcement could take a look at.
The DOJ Election Crimes Manual says an offer may be illegal if it is intended to induce or reward the voter for engaging in one or more acts necessary to cast a ballot. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 says whoever pays or offers to pay, either for registration to vote or for voting, shall be fined not more than $10,000 or imprisoned not more than 5 years.
Clearly, this appears to be something that sort of crosses the line.
Former Pennsylvania District Attorney Matthew Mangino says Musk isn't directly paying people to vote for Trump, but there is an implication.
He's asking people who are registered to vote to sign a petition to say that they're committed to the First and Second Amendment. We know that the Second Amendment, is often a strong issue for Republican voters.
Mangino says Musk may wind up paying a small fine, but if he continues after being warned, the penalties could increase.
Vice President Kamala Harris makes appearances in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin all in one day. At all three stops, she's joined by former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney as the Harris campaign attempts to win over more swing voters. NTD national correspondent Jason Blair reports.
In an ambitious tour targeting moderate suburban voters, Vice President Harris and former Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney held talks in 3 separate battleground states on Monday. The first in Chester County, Pennsylvania.
This election is presenting, for the first time probably in certainly recent history, a very clear choice and difference between the two nominees. And I think that is what, as much as anything, is bringing us as Americans together.
We're not always going to agree, but I know Vice President Harris will always do what she believes is right for this country.
The event was moderated by Sarah Longwell, who founded the Republican Accountability Project. According to Longwell, some of the audience members were undecided voters. During the 40-minute event, Harris and Cheney answered questions from Longwell and audience members. One question came from an attendee who said she's struggling with the cost of simultaneously taking care of her 7-year-old son and 72-year-old mother who's in a nursing home.
So my plan is that instead of those scenarios I just mapped out, we will restructure it so that Medicare covers the cost of in-home health care for your parent, so that they can be at home.
Then later on, Harris and Cheney traveled to Oakland County, Michigan, and held a similar talk.
There's so much about this last era. When I talk about turn the page, that's what I'm referring to, like the last decade, that has been about some powerful forces suggesting that the measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down, instead of what I think most of us believe, regardless of your party affiliation, that the real measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you lift up.
Their last stop is in Waukesha County in Wisconsin. All 3 suburban counties in the Blue Wall states were won by former South Carolina Governor and U.S. Ambassador Nikki Haley, who ran against former President Trump for the Republican nomination. Trump responded on Truth Social to Cheney joining Harris. He warned that instability in the Middle East would continue under a Harris administration. Later this week, Harris will be in Philadelphia for a town hall on Wednesday, and on Thursday she'll be joined by former President Obama for a rally in Atlanta, Georgia. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
Former President Trump is in the battleground state of North Carolina, surveying damage from the hurricane today. NTD's David Lamb reports.
So I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, and in a little bit I'll show you a close-up of the damage behind me where Hurricane Helene impacted 25 counties in the western side of the state. Now, Trump today spoke to the press, faith leaders, and residents. He talked about voting, safety, and rebuilding as well. And before we get to his remarks, the State Board of Elections just said on Sunday that over 1 million ballots were received just for early voting within 4 days. Let's take a listen to Trump's speech.
Voting is the least of it right now. They got to vote. They want to vote because it's very important, but they have to survive. That's why I can't believe the early voting. I mean, the early voting is records. I can't, when they told me that, I was shocked. I got a call from Michael Watley. He said, "Sir, you're not going to believe this, but they're setting records in North Carolina voting." And it's just that they're great people. I mean, they lost their house and they're standing outside voting. So obviously we want them to vote, but we want them to live and survive and be happy and healthy, because this is really a tragedy. It's really something. It's been a terrible ordeal, and this area was hit about as hard as anybody's ever seen. To all those homes, and your homes have been destroyed. Many of you are rebuilding, and many of you are going to just start all over again. And the communities were ravaged and destroyed. We're praying for you, and we will not forget about you. We will never forget about you. We're going to be working with you for a long time to come to get it back together. When I'm president, I will stand with you until the communities are fully rebuilt. Every single inch of every property will be fully rebuilt, greater and more beautiful than it was before.
What we're seeing here is the remains of Moe's Southwest Grill, one of the many restaurants and buildings that's been devastated by Hurricane Helene. So you can see tables, chairs, and furnishings just tossed around because of the flooding. Now, telephone poles and light poles have been knocked down as well. Now, earlier I spoke to some residents and voters right outside of one of Trump's press conference, and this is what they have to say.
Well, I'm voting for him, and I appreciate him coming to our neighborhood to support us. My organization's office. It's not mine. I don't own it. It got flooded, and my church has been handing stuff out. And the fact that he's coming to help us and make a presence is huge. And I'm so grateful. I had to come out and say thank you. I've prayed for Joe Biden. I've prayed for Kamala. I want them to succeed, but it has made it more difficult. Gas prices have just gone way up, and it's much harder for people to live. So it's been rough. But, you know, all my heart, I want whoever's in office to succeed.
We're super excited. I know he is. I told him he wasn't going to be able to get close to him for anything, but he could at least get a glimpse of them. But the hurricane that happened and the hot commodity stuff is like doubled in price when you do go into a store. You know, normal water is like $3-4 in a store. Now it's anywhere from $8 to $10.
Now, the majority of voters that we spoke to in parts of Buncombe County said they're voting for Harris and Walz. They say that their issues are women's rights, immigration, and as well as having a sense of maturity between the government and cohesiveness with the lawmakers. Now, back since the 1980s, according to State Board of Elections, North Carolina has always voted for a Republican president, except back in 2008 when Barack Obama was elected. North Carolina is a key swing state. We're not sure how it will vote in terms of presidency, but Trump says he's confident he will win North Carolina. Reporting in Asheville, North Carolina, David Lamb, NTD News.
The White House getting pressed on how Vice President Kamala Harris's policy view differs from President Biden's. It comes as both Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, were asked the same question today. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
As the Trump campaign seizes on Vice President Harris's previous comment that there's not a thing that comes to mind should have done differently from President Biden, the White House on Monday defending the VP by saying that every president has to cut their own path. The press secretary, however, did not lay out specific policy differences.
But she is going to certainly cut her own path.
Can you think of any issue, foreign policy or domestic policy, in which the vice president has a differing point of view than the president?
They are partners in the way that this administration has moved forward.
It comes as Harris on Monday was pressed on a similar question.
Needless to say, mine will not be a continuation of the Biden administration. I bring to it my own ideas.
She also did not specify which policies she's referring to. But her running mate, Governor Tim Walz, on the same topic on Monday listed Medicare as an example of how Harris's and Biden's policies could differ.
Can you point to a policy decision over the last 4 years that you and the vice president would have handled differently from President Biden?
Well, I think this expansion on Medicare is something that I wished would have been proposed sooner. But look, there were other issues that were being dealt with, and she's her own leader.
Harris has previously said that one difference is that she would tap a Republican to serve in her cabinet. Meanwhile, President Biden is set to visit the purple state of New Hampshire on Tuesday to tout the administration's record on lowering drug prices. He's also set to visit a local campaign office. But relatively speaking, President Biden has not been participating in too many traditional campaign events for Vice President Harris after he dropped out. He's been mostly focused on White House events that are official events by the administration, where he will promote the administration's record while also appealing to battleground state voters. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
The bipartisan House task force probing former President Trump's first assassination attempt released its interim report this morning. The report says the assassination attempt was preventable and should not have happened. Lawmakers found there was a, quote, lack of planning and coordination between the Secret Service and its law enforcement partners before the rally. They also pointed to fragmented lines of communication and failure to engage the shooter at several pivotal moments. This is an interim report, and the panel will release its final report by December 13th. The Supreme Court today declined to hear an appeal by ex-Trump attorney Michael Cohen. It sought to revive a lawsuit against his former boss. NTD's legal correspondent Arlene Richards has more.
The Supreme Court on Monday rejected Michael Cohen's efforts to revive a lawsuit he previously filed against former President Trump. The ex-Trump attorney accused his former boss of retaliation. He said the former Trump administration returned him to prison in 2020 after he penned a book critical of the former president. The justice's decision left in place 2 lower court rulings that said Cohen could not pursue his case. Cohen's lawyer, John Michael Dougherty, said the Supreme Court's decision signals a dangerous moment in American democracy. Trump's attorney, Alina Habba, said the Supreme Court has correctly denied Michael Cohen's petition, and he must finally abandon his frivolous and desperate claims. Lawyers for President Biden's administration also urged the court to deny Cohen's appeal. In 2020, Cohen was serving a 3-year sentence on multiple federal felonies, some related to work he had carried out for Trump. While in home confinement due to the COVID pandemic, Cohen was ordered back to prison because he refused to sign an agreement that barred him from speaking to the press or posting on social media. After 16 days in solitary confinement, a federal judge ordered Cohen released. The judge found that officials had retaliated against Cohen on free speech grounds. The lawsuit was seeking damages for the alleged violation of his Fourth Amendment right to be free from unreasonable search and seizure. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
The so-called Central Park Five have filed a federal lawsuit against former President Trump, alleging he made false and defamatory statements about their 1989 case during last month's presidential debate. During the debate with Vice President Harris, Trump claimed that the men had pleaded guilty and were involved in the assault and killing of a woman in Central Park. But the lawsuit asserts that all 5 men maintained their innocence, pleaded not guilty, and that no victims were killed in the attack. The 20-page filing highlights past comments by Trump, including 2013 tweets and a 2014 editorial in which he called their settlement with the city a disgrace. The plaintiffs, now in their 50s, say Trump acted with reckless disregard for the truth. The men are seeking both compensatory and punitive damages. They also claim Trump's remarks caused emotional distress and placed them in a false light. But Trump campaign spokesperson Stephen Chung dismissed the lawsuit as a distraction and election interference. Israeli forces reported striking several financial institutions in Lebanon, which they say are supporting terrorism. This comes as the U.S. investigates a leak of documents reportedly showing details of Israel's plans to attack Iran. NTD's Jason Perry has the latest.
On Sunday, Israel warned Lebanese residents to evacuate certain locations as Israeli forces would soon be attacking Hezbollah's financial institutions in Lebanon. Israel accused Iran of using civilian institutions to finance Hezbollah's terrorist activity. And on Sunday, hundreds of residents fled their homes in Beirut as explosions were heard across the Lebanese capital. Israel reported striking nearly 30 targets in Hezbollah's financial system in Lebanon, including a financial institution in the coastal city of Tyre, another in the Bekaa Valley in East Lebanon, and one in the town of Zahrani in southern Lebanon.
Our stores are here. Our store and our livelihood are gone. This neighborhood is all civilian, with nothing here or there. They hit it last night. Our store is right there and everything is gone. It's a residential neighborhood. What else am I supposed to tell you?
Israel's chief of the general staff said that in addition to those strikes, they're targeting Hezbollah's senior command, and troops on the ground are targeting Hezbollah's lower command.
This overall effort forms a complementary response, including against Iran, which ultimately funds, sends weapons, and dispatches personnel here. Be aware that we are addressing that aspect as well.
And in another development, the U.S. is probing a leak of classified documents that reportedly detail Israel's plans to retaliate against Iran. NTD has not been able to independently verify their authenticity. The documents, which were circulating on the Telegram messaging app, indicated that Israel was still moving military assets in position to conduct the attack on Iran. White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby said they are currently investigating the leak, and he doesn't think there are any more documents like these that will become public. Also on Monday, Lebanon's caretaker prime minister met with U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein to talk about conditions for a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken headed back to the Middle East for his 11th trip since the October 7th attacks, where he'll also talk about a ceasefire and the importance of ending the war in the Gaza Strip. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The U.S. today announcing a new $400 million aid package for Ukraine. That's amid reports that North Korean soldiers might soon fight for Russia. NTD's international correspondent Ariane Pastar has a Ukraine update, starting with the latest on the battlefield situation.
Ukrainian officials say one person is dead and 14 injured after an attack in the country's southeast. This comes just a day after Russia allegedly attacked Kyiv and other cities.
It was horrible. I thought that part of the house is going to collapse, but thank God the whole house has not collapsed. Surely the old construction methods prevented it.
And in central Ukraine, 9 people are reported injured after an overnight attack. This includes a 12-year-old girl. A hotel, a few apartment blocks, a bank, a post office and more were damaged during the attack. Despite Sunday's attack on Kyiv, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is visiting Ukraine's capital on Monday.
What matters is the way that Ukraine fights back.
Before meeting President Volodymyr Zelensky, Austin announced a new major aid package for Ukraine.
And so I'm pleased to announce today the commitment of a $400 million presidential drawdown package to provide your forces with additional munitions, armored vehicles, and anti-tank weapons.
The announcement of the aid package comes just weeks before the U.S. presidential elections. Former President Trump has previously suggested he'd aim to end the conflict rather than keep sending money to Ukraine. And the State Department now commenting on reports about North Korean troops fighting for Russia. South Korea's intelligence agency says North Korea shipped 1,500 special forces to Russia for training.
If this is accurate, it would also demonstrate what we would view as Russia's growing desperation in its ongoing war of aggression.
And on Tuesday, members of the BRICS alliance will be meeting in Moscow. Russia, China, Iran and others are among the members. On Monday, the White House was asked whether the U.S. is concerned that BRICS could undermine the U.S. economy.
We're not looking at BRICS as an evolving into some kind of geopolitical rival. That's not how we look at it.
However, BRICS members have increased talk about replacing the U.S. dollar as the global currency for trade, saying they should use their own currencies instead. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. We're just 2 weeks away from Election Day. Polls are tightening on key congressional races in Pennsylvania, as the state could make it or break it for control of the White House and Congress. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the details.
Pennsylvania's longest-serving Democrat Senator Bob Casey is having to work hard to keep his winning streak going. This year, he's facing a tough challenger, Republican David McCormick, who's a businessman with ties to Washington, D.C. Over the weekend, polls in this race tightened, leaving the two now in a tie. And this seat is crucial for Democrats to hold, as Republicans are projected to take the majority in the Senate. And over in the House, another Pennsylvania district is now in play. That is Pennsylvania's 10th district. Analysts have moved this race closer to the left as Cook Political Report over the weekend changed its rating of this race from leans Republican now to a toss-up. Democrat Janelle Stelson is trying to unseat longtime Republican Congressman Scott Perry. Perry still has the upper hand, Cook wrote of their rating change, but noted his, quote, unique vulnerabilities coupled with Democrats' spending advantage as the reason for moving the race to the left. Democrats have pounced on Perry's denial of the 2020 election results and his anti-abortion stance as a way to sway independent voters in the purple state. Both Democrats and Republicans are eager for Pennsylvania wins up and down the ballot, as it could make it or break it this cycle for which party takes more control in Washington. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Meanwhile, hundreds of Nebraska Democrats gathered to form a human blue dot in Omaha yesterday. NTD's Dana Monahan reports on the event, which comes just weeks after a failed bid by Republicans to change the way the state's electoral votes are distributed.
The human blue dot was organized by the group Blue Dot Energy and the Douglas County Democratic Party. It represents the electoral results these same voters hope for in Nebraska.
Yeah, so we are one of 2 states that splits our electoral vote based on congressional districts. So overall, the state has 5 electoral votes. We're split into 3 districts. The 2 senators in the other 2 districts will very likely go red. But Omaha is a very purple district, and we are a battleground for it.
Omaha's lone electoral vote has gained importance, as potential electoral maps show that in some scenarios, Harris might need that single vote to win the presidency.
All the other blue states hold we can lose North Carolina and Georgia. And as long as our electoral vote goes to Kamala Harris, that's 270.
Nebraska Governor Jim Pillen was considering calling a special session of the state legislature in September to change the electoral vote distribution just weeks before voting. State Senator Mike McDonnell, a Republican who represents South Omaha, was the lone Republican voice against the change and prevented the special session. McDonnell says he personally disagrees with the winner-take-all model.
But also, I was willing to let the people vote, and I think they should vote midterm. And if they're going to make that kind of change, and let everybody know the rules have changed 2 years before a presidential election.
McDonnell compared it to a football game.
If you were watching a football game and the coach called the timeout, went over and said to the referee, can we please change the value of a field goal from 3 points to 4 points because I need that to win the game, you know, everybody would shake their head, the whole stadium would go crazy. That just wouldn't happen.
Omaha voter Ellen Ehlers felt let down by McDonnell's decision not to support winner-take-all.
In my opinion, it represents the whole of Nebraska being a red state, and it could make a difference in the long run. So I was disappointed in that decision.
Ehlers says her neighborhood has a lot of people supporting Omaha being that blue dot, which could help Democrats.
And we tried to come up with a lighthearted response and use the red dot with the yellow Trump wave across the top.
Early voting has already begun in Nebraska, both by mail and in person. An Omaha voter who took part in the Blue Dot event says they are doing their best to make sure their candidate wins.
I hope that based on looking at the candidates, that she won't need our Blue Dot, but we will deliver it to her in case she does.
One other electoral scenario is a tie of 269 versus 269 electoral votes between Harris and Trump. That would lead to an election in the House of Representatives, where each state gets one vote. With more Republican-leaning states, the House would most likely elect Trump. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. The men formerly known as the Central Park Five before they were exonerated filed a defamation lawsuit against former President Trump. The group accused Trump of making false and defamatory statements during the presidential debate, in which he suggested that they had killed an individual and pleaded guilty to the crime. While stumping for Trump, Elon Musk announced he's giving away $1 million a day to registered voters in battleground states to sign his petition. Some election law experts said the sweepstakes could violate laws against paying people to register to vote. Former President Trump surveyed the damage from Hurricane Helene in Asheville, North Carolina, and pledged support for the local communities. He then held a rally in Greenville before addressing faith leaders in Concord. Vice President Harris swings through 3 Rust Belt battleground states in one day: Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. She joined former GOP Congresswoman Liz Cheney to appeal to Republican voters who are against Trump. Early voting is kicking off in several states today, including Alaska, Arkansas, Colorado, Connecticut, Idaho, South Carolina, Texas, and parts of Florida. It will begin tomorrow in Wisconsin and then this Saturday in Michigan. Joining us now to explore this key battleground state is Lawrence Wilson, political reporter at the Epic Times. Lawrence, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you again. To begin, polls are effectively tied right now between Trump and Harris in the 7 swing states the election effectively hinges on. Let's zoom in on Michigan, though, which you've been covering extensively. How have the two candidates been different in their approaches when it comes to reaching out to voters there?
Well, honestly, they've been more the same than different in terms of what they're doing. They're both blanketing the state with rallies, both by the major candidate, top of the ticket, and by the vice presidential candidates. As you mentioned, Harris was in the state again today. Both of them were there on Friday and each made 3 appearances in a single day. So they are spending a lot of time in Michigan. The real difference is in the key issues that they're talking about. Harris majors on abortion rights or access to abortion. Trump, of course, talks most about the border, but they're both really making promises to the auto industry because that's very important in Michigan, and they're both promising that they will revive manufacturing and particularly the auto industry. Of course, they're both campaigning pretty hard against the other, so a lot of criticism of one candidate by the other.
Now, Michigan's Secretary of State says she expects the results to come out after Election Day. Given how crucial Michigan is, how soon are we likely to get election results from that state?
Well, Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson said she thinks by the evening of Wednesday, the day after Election Day, they should have a result. Now, those are unofficial results, and if this election is as close as we think it's going to be in Michigan and in other swing states or battleground states, verification of those votes becomes all the more important. The ballots are counted by machine. That goes relatively quickly. But absent voter ballots or mail-in ballots, those have to be hand validated, matching signatures against the voter registration roll, and that takes time. So for Michigan, the larger counties can start that process for absentee ballots 8 days ahead of the election to speed things up. Everybody has the option, each county has the option to start the day before Election Day, but that can take considerable time. Should have unofficial results by November 6th. Certification won't be until November 22nd. That's almost 3 weeks after the election.
And Lauren, zooming out a bit here, given how important all the swing states are, especially this year, how soon will we know the election results from the other swing states?
Well, again, that largely depends on how they go about the counting. Most of the states allow for absentee ballots and early ballots to start the counting a little bit early. Some states do not. And all of them have a signature match or identity match or some mechanism there to validate those ballots by hand, to verify that they're legitimate ballots. So it could take days in a state like Nevada, although it only has 3 electoral votes, those could still be critical. And they don't allow counting of absentee ballots until Election Day.
Now back to Michigan, the state saw 100,000 uncommitted votes during the Democratic primary earlier this year, and that group has also refused to endorse Harris. Now, pro-Palestinian campus protests have died down since earlier this year, but in a state where the race is so close, how big of an impact could the uncommitted group have?
Well, it could be huge. This is a large population of folks, the Arab American, Muslim American community, especially in southeastern Michigan. Folks with a Middle Eastern background are very concerned about this issue. The leaders of that uncommitted movement had said they would not endorse Harris, but they did not endorse Trump. In fact, they said they were going to work against Trump. So it leaves voters in that group with a kind of a pay your money and take your choice. Don't have an endorsement for either candidate. If they decide not to support Harris, that takes a significant chunk of voters out of a traditionally Democratic pool. And that group accounts for about 2.5% of the state's population. So it could be very significant.
And now one aspect that's been raising some eyebrows in the state is a discrepancy in voter rolls, given that Michigan has 8.4 million registered voters. That's 500,000 more than the eligible voting population. Republicans have filed a lawsuit saying inflated voter rolls could lead to fraud. The state says it's in the process of removing 600,000 inactive voters by 2027. Now, according to Bridge, Michigan, the state's rolls are among the nation's most inflated. Why do you think that is? How difficult will it be to correct them?
Well, one of the problems that Michigan faces and every state faces is that there's a federal law which mandates that even when you determine that you have reason to believe that a person is no longer living at a given address, their registration address, you cannot remove them from the voter roll until 2 federal elections have gone by. So what Michigan does is they send out a voter verification. If it comes back undelivered, they place that person on the inactive list, and then after 2 election cycles, they remove them. Of course, they can remove people who are deceased and people who asked to be removed earlier, but it mostly has to do with that gap in time, up to 2 years or more, between when a person moves out of state or changes addresses, moves to a different jurisdiction, and when they can be actually taken off the roll. So that accounts for it. Now, Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State, has said that they've removed a lot of voters since 2019. They've removed 800,000 voters from the roll. Of those, 500,000 or so were deceased. 275,000 or so are people who had moved. They couldn't verify their address anymore. So they are cleaning the rolls. It just takes time to do.
Lawrence Wilson, political reporter at the Epoch Times. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Joining us now at the Election Data Hub is NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, with 15 days until the election, early in-person voting starts this Saturday in Michigan. Now, this is another battleground state that's been back and forth in the polls. Where do things stand now?
Thank you, Tiv. Yeah, 15 electoral votes here up for grabs. And it's really been back and forth, like you said, for months. Let's take a look at a recent poll here. This is according to Rasmussen reports in the state of Michigan. As you can see here, a dead heat. Donald Trump, Kamala Harris tied at 48%. Now, if you rewind 4 years in 2020, Joe Biden took this state by 3% over Donald Trump. That 3% equates to approximately 155,000 votes. But according to the polls, Trump has made up that 3-point gap. Well, what has been the difference? Let's go ahead and take a look at some demographics to see where Trump is making up the ground here. Now, this is Michigan male voters. These margins here are Trump versus the Democratic nominee. Now, in 2016, when Trump won the state, he had a 12-point lead over Hillary Clinton among men in Michigan. 4 years later, that was down to a 10-point lead over Joe Biden, who won it there. As you can see, he's got a modest 4-point bump, 14-point lead over Kamala Harris, according to the polls right now. Well, how about among women? Same thing here, Trump versus the Democratic nominee. These margins here, so 2016, minus 11. Hillary Clinton had an 11-point lead over him 8 years ago among females in Michigan. That was up to 14 points. Biden actually increased that lead to 14 in 2020. But actually, under Kamala Harris, it's actually gone down a couple points. So another slight bump here for Trump of 2%. There's actually the biggest here. Black voters in the state of Michigan. Now, according to Pew Research, this demographic, if you will make up 14% of all eligible voters in 2024. Now, again, here, these margins are the Democratic nominee versus Donald Trump. As you can see here, 2016, Hillary Clinton, a huge 86-point lead over Trump among black voters in the state. Biden pretty much maintained that 4 years later with 85-point advantage. But this is a big one here. Down to 63 points here for Kamala Harris, according to the polls. This 22-point swing in favor of Donald Trump, equates to approximately 160,000 vote loss for the Democrats. Now, keep in mind, in 2020, Joe Biden won the state by just 155,000 votes, so very significant here. Now, of course, the question is, why the change? Why the shift here? Well, let's take a look at this recent poll again here, where voters were asked, which issue should the next president address first? And this is just among Michigan voters. Number one here, rising prices. That's no surprise. Prices, economy have been number one for years. Number two, a bit of a surprise here, illegal immigration keeps getting higher and higher in the polls, really over the last 3 years. And these top two issues favor Donald Trump, whereas these third and fourth one, protecting our democracy as well as abortion, these more favor Kamala Harris. So, Tiff, we're seeing shifts in gender and race playing kind of a big part in this election here in Michigan. But of course, it's still a dead heat, though. Back to you at the desk.
All right, Dave, as always, thanks for that breakdown. And it is a decision that will impact the future of the United States. Voters across the country will make their choice for president in less than 2 weeks. NTD's Sam Wong was out in D.C. to find out what Americans say is at stake in this election.
How important do you think this election is?
I think it's the most significant election in probably the nation's history.
On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give it about a 7. Elections happen every 4 years. Thought process happen every 4 years in the executive branch. You know, they don't control everything.
I think it's going to be a clear reflection of the direction our democracy is heading and whether or not we're going to have a good democracy going forward.
Monumental importance. One of our candidates is going to push our country into socialism and the other one's going to try to save it.
I think it's probably one of the most important elections we have ever in our democracy.
Everyone should get out and vote.
no matter what, no matter who you support.
I think every election is important, and as I think someone said, elections have consequences.
It's hugely important. I think it's one of the most important elections in our country's history, actually.
I think it's incredibly important for us with a son. There are certain people that we see in power now that I would precisely say, don't be like those people.
Tell me what's at stake in this election.
Us.
Well, women's rights.
What's real, what isn't? I mean, are we going to rewrite history?
Just getting our country back to a place where it's united instead of divided.
I think individual freedoms are at stake. We talk about censorship, basic democracies, and this is coming from both sides.
Life's gone on here for 250 years. I think it'll go on pretty much the same.
Foreign relations are in the tank. The economy's in the tank. Well, I think the economy is to the point of no return anyway.
The country's going in a direction that's not favorable. And if it keeps going in the same direction, then we might not notice it in the years to come.
The Department of Education is at stake. I mean, our EPA is at stake. I mean, if anyone's taken a look at Project 2025.
We can't sustain the 16 million that have come in since Harris has been in office. Crime, it's all tied together, the economy, inflation.
I think how we deal with our foreign adversaries, and our allies.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer in New York City. Jury selection began today in the Daniel Penny case. He's the Marine Corps veteran accused of causing the death of homeless man Jordan Neely on a subway in May of 2023. Witnesses on the F train in Manhattan said Neely was shouting, demanding money, and acting erratically. Prosecutors said Penny approached Neely and tried to restrain him by placing him in a chokehold. 2 other passengers helped. Neely later died from compression of the neck. Attorneys for Penny say he was just trying to hold Neely down before the police arrived and didn't intend to kill Neely. Penny faces charges of second-degree manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide. He could face years in prison if convicted. The veteran is currently released on bond. The trial is set to last around a month. And that's all for today's news. Around-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.